Arif had lived in the city for 6 years, but no one really knew him. He was the boy who delivered tea in the mornings, swept the alleyways by noon, and folded chairs at the back of the mosque after Maghrib. He didn't talk much, his eyes stayed low, and his back stayed bent like he carried something heavier than just tea trays. He lived alone in a broken rooftop room above a tailor's shop. The ceiling leaked when it rained. There was no fan, but he never complained. The shopkeeper downstairs would often ask, "Boy, don't you have a family?" Arif would only smile and say, "Maybe they'll find me someday." And then he'd carry the empty tea glasses downstairs. On that particular day, the sun was harsh, roads were sticky with sweat and heat. Arif was on his way back from delivering a parcel when he heard a scream. A little girl had broken free from her mother's hand and was running across the busy road chasing a red balloon. A car was speeding down from the other side. The driver was honking, but the girl didn't hear. Everything moved slowly for a second, and then Arif ran. He dropped his bag and leaped onto the road. With one strong dive, he scooped the child into his arms and rolled onto the other side just as the car screeched past them. The balloon burst under the tires. The crowd gasped. The mother was in shock. Before anyone could thank him, Arif stood up, brushed dust off his sleeves, and disappeared into the nearby alley. That evening, social media exploded. A camera shop had captured the moment on CCTV. The clip showed Arif rushing in, lifting the girl, saving her life. The child's face was blurred, but Arif's wasn't. His tired clothes, his skinny arms, his quiet face all captured clearly. People started calling him the silent hero. News channels picked up the story. The mayor's office took notice. "Find this boy," said the mayor. "The city owes him more than just applause." But Arif didn't own a TV. He didn't know he was being searched. He only knew that his delivery bag was torn, and he'd have to stitch it again. Life had always been about small things for him: how to survive the day, how to save the next. 10 rupees. He didn't believe in big things. He didn't believe people noticed boys like him. The next morning, as he was pouring chai at the corner stall, a sleek black car stopped nearby. A man in a suit stepped out, holding a printed photograph. He looked around and walked straight to Arif. "Is this you?" he asked. Arif glanced at the photo. It was a still from the CCTV footage. He looked confused but nodded slowly. The man handed him a letter. "You're invited to City Hall. The mayor wants to honor you. Please be there tomorrow by noon." People at the tea stall stared. The owner dropped a cup. Arif stood still, letter trembling in his hand. He had never spoken to a mayor, never stepped inside a building with air conditioning. Why would they want him there? That night, he sat on the rooftop, staring at the letter under the moonlight. The handwriting was elegant. His name was written properly, no spelling mistakes. He ran his fingers over it like it was made of gold, but his heart felt heavy, not with fear, but with memory. He pulled out an old cloth bag from under his bed. Inside was a blanket, patched and torn, and a tiny paper folded like a treasure. He opened it gently. There was a name written there, faded ink, a stranger's name. He whispered it once and then looked back at the sky. The next day, Arif arrived at City Hall in the only white shirt he owned. It had a stain near the collar, but he'd ironed it carefully. Cameras clicked as he walked through the glass doors. Journalists whispered, "That's him. That's the boy from the video." The mayor stood on the stage, beaming. The hall was filled with applause. Arif kept his eyes low. The mayor spoke proudly. "In a time when people look away, this boy ran toward danger. He saved a child's life. With no expectation of reward. This is the spirit our city needs." The crowd clapped again. The mayor turned toward Arif and held out a small golden medal on a red ribbon. Arif stepped forward. He took the medal silently, held it in his hand, and looked at it for a long moment. And then he did something no one expected. He turned away from the microphone, stepped down from the stage, and walked into the audience. His eyes searched slowly, row by row. People turned to look, whispering in confusion. Finally, Arif stopped in front of a thin old man sitting in the last row. The man wore a gray shawl, dusty and frayed. His face was wrinkled like dry paper, and his eyes were fixed on the floor. Arif knelt down, took the medal from around his neck, and placed it in the old man's hands. "This is yours," he said softly. The cameras clicked wildly. Someone gasped. The mayor's smile froze. The old man looked up with wide eyes. His lips trembled. Why me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Arif only said, "Because you saved me first." And then he turned around and walked out of the hall, leaving behind a medal, a silent crowd, and a question that echoed louder than any speech. Who was that old man? And what had he done to make a forgotten boy give him the city's highest honor? The old man held the medal in his shaking hands as the hall fell silent. The mayor didn't speak. The cameras stopped clicking. Everyone just stared at the wrinkled figure now sitting in the back row, holding something he had never dreamed of touching. A few journalists rushed toward him, asking questions. "Who are you? Why did he give it to you? What does this mean?" But the old man didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the medal, like it held a memory too painful to speak aloud. After a while, he stood up slowly, pressed the medal to his chest, and walked out of the hall without a word. No one followed him. No one knew where to find him, not even his name. Meanwhile, Arif disappeared just as quietly as he had come. When reporters reached his rooftop room, it was already locked. The shopkeeper downstairs said Arif left early that morning and hadn't returned. He's a quiet boy, the shopkeeper said. Never caused trouble, but he looked different yesterday. Like something was bothering him. Rumors began to spread. Some said the old man was his father. Others said he had once saved Arif's life. But no one had answers. The truth was locked inside Arif's silence. 3 days passed. The story exploded online. People made videos about Arif's mysterious act. The phrase, "because you saved me first," trended everywhere. Still, no one knew who the old man was. Until a tea vendor posted a photo. "This man comes to my stall every evening. Always sits alone, never speaks much. But yesterday, he had this medal." That photo reached the mayor's office. Investigators finally found the man. His name was Baba Farid. He lived in an old, nearly forgotten shelter at the edge of the city. He had no family, no income, only a rusted walking stick and a wooden box filled with faded letters and black and white photos. The mayor sent a team to speak with him. They offered help, food, clothes, even a better place to live. But Baba Farid only asked one thing. "Bring me the boy," he said. "I need to tell him something before my time ends." But Arif was gone. No one could find him. Until one night, a woman named Noor came forward. She worked at a small charity school in the old quarter. "I know Arif," she said. "He used to clean our schoolyard after hours. Very quiet. But one day he told me about a man who saved his life when he was a child." Everyone leaned in, as Noor continued. "He said he was 6 years old, running from a burning building. People were screaming. Fire was everywhere. His parents didn't make it. He was alone, choking in the smoke. And then, someone lifted him, wrapped him in a shawl, carried him outside. That man disappeared before anyone could say thank you." Noor paused. Arif never forgot. He said the man's eyes were kind, and that he wore a dusty gray shawl. The mayor's assistant showed her the photo of Baba Farid. Noor's hands trembled. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man Arif described." The truth clicked like puzzle pieces falling into place. The boy who saved a girl from death had once been saved himself by a stranger who had vanished into the smoke. The medal wasn't a gift, it was a return. But where was Arif now? Late one evening, as Baba Farid sat outside the shelter under a dim streetlight, he heard footsteps. Slow, familiar. He turned. Arif stood there, holding 2 cups of tea. No cameras, no crowd, just silence. He sat down beside the old man and placed 1 cup in front of him. Baba Farid looked at him, tears in his eyes. "You remembered me?" he asked. Arif nodded. "I tried to forget, but I couldn't. Your shawl, your voice, your hands, they saved me." The old man smiled. "Thought you died in that fire? I carried you out and left before the roof collapsed." Arif looked down. "I never knew your name until now. I only knew I owed my life to a stranger." They sat quietly, sipping tea, 2 lives joined by 1 moment from long ago. Arif pulled out the mayor's medal from his pocket. "They gave this to me, but I couldn't keep it. It was always yours." Baba Farid tried to give it back. "But you saved that girl." Arif shook his head. "Because you saved me first. I learned courage from you." The old man reached into his wooden box and handed Arif a faded photograph. It showed a young soldier in uniform, holding a child wrapped in a blanket. "That was me," he said. "A long time ago, I spent my life saving others. But no one ever came back. You did." Arif placed the photo carefully in his shirt pocket. "I came back because I had to. Because some debts are not written in words, they are written in scars." The next morning, the mayor received a letter. It was handwritten, shaky but clear. It said, "I do not need a new home or gifts. But this boy Arif, he deserves more than what the streets can offer." People in the city had started calling him the man with the gray shawl. News channels aired old photos of Baba Farid, children lit candles outside the shelter, and social media called him the hero who disappeared too early. But no one really knew who he was. Where had he come from? What made him risk his life for a child he didn't know? The mayor asked his staff to search deeper. They began with old hospital records, refugee lists, and military files. It took days, but finally, a nurse from a forgotten town came forward. Her name was Shaista, and she remembered a man named Farid, who once carried wounded children into her clinic over and over again during the floods of 1988. She sent an old file. Inside were photos, some water-damaged, some torn. One picture showed a young Farid standing knee-deep in muddy water, holding 2 kids, both crying. The caption said, "Volunteer, no last name given. Disappeared after the last rescue." The mayor stared at the photo for a long time. That's when he made a decision. He would go visit Farid himself. No media, no photographers, just him, and the man whose act had shaken an entire city. When the mayor entered the shelter's courtyard, Farid was sitting under a neem tree. His shawl was the same, his back slightly bent, but his eyes were sharp. The mayor greeted him with respect, and sat beside him on the dusty bench. "I came to ask," the mayor said gently, "who were you before all this?" Farid smiled without looking up. "Before I was a man with too many dreams and too few choices." He paused. "I was born in a village where the sky touched The fields. My father was a teacher. He taught me that courage is not noiseless, what you do when no one is watching. The mayor listened as Farid continued. I joined the army as a medic, not to fight, to save. I never liked guns. I liked stitching wounds and giving water to the dying. He looked at his hands. But one day, during a rescue mission, I lost my entire team. The bridge collapsed. I was the only one who made it. I walked 4 hours with a child on my back, trying to find help. That child didn't make it. I buried her myself under a mango tree. Farid's voice cracked, but he didn't stop. After that, I couldn't wear the uniform again. I vanished. Started walking from city to city, helping quietly fires, floods, train accidents. No one remembered my name. I didn't mind. I didn't want to be remembered. Until that day, I saw the building on fire, and that little boy choking in the smoke. The mayor was silent. He finally asked, "Why didn't you ever come forward?" Farid turned to him. Because heroes should never ask to be seen. They should act, and then fade like morning mist. That night, the mayor returned with a heavy heart. But Arif was waiting for him outside the building. He had heard about the visit and wanted to speak. He still sees himself as a ghost, Arif said. But he saved me and maybe hundreds more. Doesn't he deserve to feel alive again? The mayor nodded. He does, but he won't take medals or speeches. He needs something else. Arif's eyes lit up. Let me do it. Let me carry his story forward. Not through words, but through work. A few weeks later, a small school opened in the same neighborhood where Arif had once swept floors. Its name was simple, the Shawl School. No grand ceremony. Just a wooden sign, a few benches, and a big picture of Baba Farid in his younger days. Smiling beside the words, "Because you saved me first." Children from broken homes, street corners, and shelters began to come. They learned more than math or reading. They learned about kindness, rescue, and quiet bravery. Arif taught there part-time. In the evenings, he still cleaned streets for money. But in the mornings, he stood before those children and told them about fire, about courage, and about how one man's silence saved hundreds of voices. Baba Farid visited sometimes. He didn't speak much, just sat at the back and smiled. But the children always ran to him, wrapped their arms around his shawl, and asked, "Will you tell us a story today?" One rainy evening, as Arif was closing the school gate, a woman arrived. She was holding a notebook and a camera. "I'm a journalist," she said. "I've been searching for the real story behind all this. You and Farid, there's more to tell, isn't there?" Arif hesitated. "This isn't about news," she nodded. "I know, but people need real stories right now. Stories that show hope doesn't come with fame, it comes with hands like his." Arif looked at the old photo of Farid hanging on the wall. "If he agrees," Arif said softly, "you can write it." That night, Arif visited Farid. The shelter was quiet, but Farid was awake, reading an old letter. Arif told him about the journalist. Farid laughed. "So now the world wants to hear from ghosts." Arif smiled. "Maybe it's time ghosts spoke." Farid handed him the letter. "If she wants truth, start here. This is the letter I never sent. To the family of the child I couldn't save long ago." Arif read it. It was heartbreaking, gentle, full of guilt and love. "Maybe," Farid said, "this is the real beginning." The next day, the journalist arrived again. Arif handed her the letter. He said, "This is where it starts." She read it with tears in her eyes. "This isn't just a story," she whispered. "It's a revolution," in silence. But just when it seemed like the truth would finally shine, the shelter door was found open one morning. The morning sun rose over the city's dusty streets as the news spread quickly. Baba Farid had disappeared. The shelter was empty except for the worn blanket where he used to sit, and the wooden box filled with memories. Arif stood outside, his heart pounding with worry. How could someone so strong simply vanish? Was he hurt? Did he leave on purpose? The questions circled in Arif's mind without answers. He decided to search for the man who had given him life twice, once from fire and once from fear. Arif retraced Farida's steps through narrow alleys, old markets, and forgotten parks. Every corner held a memory. The children at the school asked him where Baba Farid had gone, their innocent faces full of hope and confusion. Arif told them, he is on a journey. Sometimes heroes disappear to fight battles we cannot see. But inside, he wished he had a better answer. Days passed with no sign of the old man. Then one evening, as rain began to fall softly, Arif heard a faint voice calling from behind a broken wall near the riverbank. He rushed toward it and found Baba Farid sitting on the cold ground, wrapped in his gray shawl but weak and shivering. "I'm here," Farid whispered, "but not for long." Arif helped him to his feet. "Why did you come here alone?" he asked. Farid looked out at the dark water. "There are things I must finish, things from long ago. My past? I cannot run from it forever." That night, Farid shared a story he had never told anyone. Years before, during a flood, he had found a small village cut off by water. He helped carry the sick and children to safety. But one night, a young girl slipped into the river and drowned. Her family blamed him for not saving her. The guilt had driven Farid away from his home, from friends, and from the world. He had carried that pain silently, wrapped in his shawl. Arif listened quietly, tears falling down his cheeks. "You saved me when I was a child," he said. Now I want to save you. The next morning, Arif took Farid to a doctor. The man's body was weak from hunger and cold, but his spirit was still fierce. The doctor prescribed rest, warmth, and food. Arif stayed by his side, refusing to leave. He told the mayor about Farid's condition and asked for help. The mayor sent a team with blankets, medicine, and a small warm room at the shelter. Days turned into weeks. Farid slowly recovered, but one question remained. What about the family you lost? Arif asked gently. Farid reached into his shawl and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed with age. I wrote this to her, he said, but I never sent it. Arif unfolded the letter. It was full of apologies, love, and hope for forgiveness. Maybe, Farid said, it's time I found them. With Arif's help, Farid started searching for the girl's family. Old records, missing persons reports, and names whispered by strangers led them to a small village 2 days away. When they arrived, they found a woman waiting by a well. Her eyes were tired but kind. Farid approached slowly, holding out the letter. The woman looked at it, then at him. Her voice was soft. I am her mother. She told them how her daughter had died in the flood, how Farid had been blamed unfairly, and how years of pain had built walls between them. But seeing Farid now, she could feel the years of regret and kindness. They sat together and talked for hours. Farid asked for forgiveness. The woman held his hands and said, You saved many lives. You are forgiven. Tears flowed freely, healing wounds that time could not touch. Farid smiled for the first time in years. Arif watched quietly, knowing this moment was the true reward, not medals, not fame, but love and peace. As they returned to the city, a message awaited Arif on his phone. It was from the journalist. Farid's story must reach the world. Are you ready? Arif nodded. To himself, yes. For him, for all of us. The next day, the city held a quiet ceremony. No cameras, no speeches, just Farid, Arif, the mayor, and the children from the school. The mayor took Farid's hands and said, You are the real hero. Your courage teaches us all. The crowd clapped softly, tears shining in their eyes. Farid looked around and whispered, Thank you for seeing me. But just as the sun set behind the city skyline, Arif's phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. Some stories are just the beginning. Arif stared at the screen, heart pounding. What new path lay ahead? What more would they discover about the man in the gray shawl? Arif stared at the message on his phone again and again. Some stories are just the beginning. It echoed in his mind like a secret waiting to be unlocked. He looked at Baba Farid, sitting quietly on the worn-out bench of the shelter, his gray shawl wrapped tightly around his thin shoulders. Farid had shared so much already: the fire, the floods, the lost family, but Arif knew there was still more hidden beneath those tired eyes. He decided to ask Farid, Is there something you haven't told me yet? Something important? Farid hesitated, then nodded slowly. There is one thing. A story from before I became who I am now. A past I buried deep. That evening, as rain tapped softly against the shelter's tin roof, Farid began to speak. Before I was a medic, before I was a rescuer, I was a young man with a family, a wife and a daughter. We lived in a small village, far from the city's noise. My daughter's name was Amina. She was bright, curious, full of life. One day, I received a letter inviting me to join a special training in the city. It was a chance to serve and protect. I left with hope in my heart. Farid's voice trembled, but when I returned, the village was silent. My wife and daughter were gone. A fire had destroyed our home. They said it was an accident, but I always wondered if it was more. Arif listened, his heart breaking for the man who had lost everything. Did you ever find out what happened? He asked softly. Farid shook his head. No, I searched. For years, but it was like they disappeared from the earth. That pain pushed me away from everyone. I became a stranger to myself. He looked at Arif. You saved a child from fire once, but I lost mine in the flames. That's why I gave you the medal, because I saw my daughter in you. Arif felt tears fill his eyes. We can't let your story end here. We need to find Amina's truth. The next morning, Arif contacted the journalist who had been following their story. Together, they began digging into old police records, news archives, and witness statements from the village. What they uncovered was chilling. The fire was no accident. It was set by a group trying to force villagers to leave their land for a new development project. The investigation had been stopped by powerful people, and the truth buried. Determined to bring justice, Arif and the journalists planned to expose the story to the public. But the closer they got, the more threats they received. Strange calls, anonymous warnings, and shadows watching from afar. One night, as Arif walked home, a car followed him 4 blocks. He ducked into a crowded market, heart pounding. He knew this fight was bigger than he had imagined. Farid too felt the danger. I'm an old man, he said quietly, but these people don't care. They want silence. Arif promised. We won't let fear stop us. The city began to buzz with whispers about the man in the gray shawl and the brave boy who gave him a medal. Supporters rallied, demanding answers. The mayor increased security around them, but the threats didn't stop. One evening, as Arif prepared to leave the shelter, he found a sealed envelope taped to the door. Inside was a photo of a burnt house with a shadowy figure standing nearby. On the back, a single line was written, Stop digging, or lose everything. Arif's hands shook. He showed Eddie. The old man's eyes hardened. They want us to give up, but we have something stronger: truth. The next day, Arif and the journalist held a small press meeting. Arif spoke with courage, telling the story of Farid, the lost daughter, and the hidden fire. The city listened. The story went viral again, lighting a fire of hope and outrage. Investigations reopened. Officials promised action. And for the first time in years, Farid smiled genuinely. The message on Arif's phone sent a chill down his spine. They are closer than you think. He knew the threats were no longer empty words. Someone powerful was watching, waiting for a mistake. But Arif was not alone. Baba Farid sat beside him, his gray shawl wrapped tighter than ever, eyes steady and calm. Fear can stop many, Farid said softly, but not those who carry hope. Arif nodded, feeling the weight of those words. The city had become a battlefield of secrets and silence. Arif and the journalist continued their work, gathering more proof about the fire and the people behind it. Late nights were filled with calls, messages, and secret meetings. They moved carefully, knowing that one wrong step could put them in danger. Yet every time fear tried to close their voices, the memory of the metal and the little girl saved from fire gave them strength. One evening, as Arif returned from the school, he noticed a shadow following him down a narrow street. He quickened his pace, heart pounding. The shadow matched his steps but disappeared when he entered a crowded tea stall. He exhaled slowly, but the feeling of being watched stayed. The next day, the mayor called Arif to his office. "You and Farid have stirred things up," he said seriously. "I want to protect you, but the city's politics are complicated." The mayor handed Arif a small envelope. Inside is a phone number, someone you can trust. Use it if things get worse. That night, Arif called the number. A calm voice answered. "We've been watching. Your courage is rare. We can help." The voice belonged to a woman named Aliyah, an investigative journalist with a reputation for uncovering the truth. She promised to bring more light to the story and keep Arif and Farid safe. This alliance gave Arif new hope. Meanwhile, Farid began teaching children more stories, not just about courage, but about standing up for what is right, even when it's hard. The shelter became a small beacon of light in the dark city. Arif worked with Aliyah to prepare a major report that could change everything. But before they could publish, Farid asked Arif to come with him to an old government building on the city's edge. Inside the dusty hall, Farid pointed to a faded wall covered in names. "These are the people who fought corruption long ago. Many paid the price." He traced his finger along a name, one that matched a signature on an old letter Arif had found. "My family was part of this. They tried to stop the project that destroyed our village. That fire was not just an accident, it was planned." Arif looked closer and saw more names marked with red crosses. "They silenced those voices," Farid said quietly. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway. A man in a dark suit appeared. "Farid," he said coldly, "it's time to stop digging." Farid stood firm. The truth cannot be buried forever. The man's eyes narrowed. "You and that boy don't understand what's at stake." Arif stepped forward. "We understand more than you think." The man smiled thinly and disappeared into the shadows. The city was buzzing with excitement and tension. Alia's report had shaken the foundations of power. People gathered in streets, chanting for justice. Newspapers printed bold headlines. But behind the scenes, Arif and Farid knew the danger was growing. Threats had become more direct, and shadows followed their every move. Yet they refused to back down. The medal, once a simple token, had become a symbol of hope and resistance. One afternoon, as Arif arrived at the shelter, he found Farid waiting outside with a small package in his hands. "This came for you," Farid said quietly. Arif opened it to find a worn photograph and a letter. The photo showed a young girl smiling brightly, holding a doll. The letter was addressed to Farid. It was from a woman named Sarah, claiming to be Amina's sister. She wrote about her family's pain, the fire, and the secrets that had kept them apart for years. Most importantly, she wanted to meet Arif. Heart raced. After all the searching, after all the pain, the family was reaching out. Farid looked at the letter with trembling hands. "Maybe this is the chance for peace," he whispered. They arranged to meet Sarah in a quiet cafe on the city's edge. When Sarah arrived, she carried years of sorrow in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope. She told them how the family had been torn apart by lies and fear. "We never knew what really happened," she said. "But we want to understand. We want to heal." The meeting was both painful and healing. Farid shared stories of the past, the floods, the fire, the loss. Sarah spoke of her mother's grief and her own search for truth. Arif listened, feeling the weight of years melt away with every word. For the first time, they were not strangers, but a family trying to rebuild what was broken. Meanwhile, the city's leaders faced pressure from the public and the media. The mayor called a special session to discuss the fire investigation and the corruption uncovered. Arif and Farid were invited as guests of honor. Cameras followed them as they entered the grand hall. The mayor stood beside Farid and said, "Today, we recognize not only bravery but the power of truth and forgiveness." Farid spoke quietly but firmly. "I did not save only one child that day. I carry all their stories with me. And today, I ask for justice, not for revenge, but for peace. The hall erupted in applause. Tears filled many eyes. Arif looked at the medal shining around Farid's neck and smiled. This was more than an award. It was a promise kept. As the session ended, a reporter asked Arif about his feelings. He said, "This medal was never mine to keep. It belonged to the man who showed me kindness when I was lost. Together, we are finding a way forward." The story spread like wildfire. People from all over the country shared their own stories of courage and forgiveness. But just as hope grew stronger, a shocking message arrived. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. "They are coming for you. Leave now." Fear gripped their hearts. They knew the fight was far from over. That night, the shelter was filled with quiet whispers and careful plans. Arif, Farid, and Sarah decided they could not run. "We stand together," Farid said. "This is our home. Our fight," Arif nodded. "For every child who needs a voice," Sarah added. "For every family broken by lies." The city slept, unaware of the storm gathering, in its shadows, but in the quiet shelter, 3 souls prepared to face whatever came next, bound by truth, courage, and the medal passed between strangers. The night was thick with silence, but inside the small shelter, Arif, Farid, and Sarah were wide awake. The message warning them to leave had changed everything. They knew the powerful people behind the fire and cover-up were watching, waiting for a chance to silence them forever. But none of them wanted to run. This was their home now, and they had a story to tell, one that could not be buried again. Arif paced the room, thinking about all they had been through, from a boy who swept streets, to a man who gave away a medal, to a stranger, and from a stranger who carried pain for decades to a family trying to heal. It was more than a story. It was a journey of courage, forgiveness, and hope. "We must be careful," Arif said, "but we cannot stop." Farid, wrapped in his gray shawl, looked at Sarah and said, "I never thought I would see this day, but here we are, facing our past and fighting for our future." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with both fear and determination. "We owe it to the ones we lost." The next morning, the mayor announced that extra security would be provided. For them, cameras were set up around the shelter, and trusted guards stayed nearby. The city had begun to rally behind their story, and people demanded justice. But the enemies of truth were not giving up. Threats continued, and mysterious accidents started to happen near the school and shelter. One afternoon, as Arif walked home, a brick smashed against a window near the shelter. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. The fight was dangerous. Yet, every time fear knocked at their door, they answered with courage. Then came the day that changed everything. The journalist Elia released a powerful documentary telling Farid's story, Arif's journey, and Sarah's family's pain. The video showed real faces, real tears, and real hope. Millions watched and shared it. The city's leaders could no longer ignore the call for justice. The government opened a new investigation, this time with independent watchdogs. Arrests were made, and corrupt officials faced trial. The flames that had destroyed so much began to die down. At the shelter, a celebration quietly took place. Children danced and sang, holding the medal that started it all. Farid smiled, tears in his eyes. Arif hugged him tightly. "We did it," he whispered together. But Farid looked out the window, watching the city that had changed so much. "This medal," he said softly, "was never about me or you. It's about every forgotten life, every silent hero. May we never forget." As the sun set, Arif placed the medal carefully in a glass case at the school. A new plaque was added beneath it, "For those who save others, not for fame, but because it is right." The city had learned a lesson, that true bravery is quiet, selfless, and passed on like a flame to the next heart in need. And as Arif looked toward the future, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, the greatest honor is to give away what you are given, and trust that kindness will find its way home.